There's a moment that comes to some people, not everyone but some, when they find themselves standing at the edge of something vast and final, and instead of turning away, they lean forward. You felt it, that strange pull, when you stood too close to a cliff edge, with wind against your face. Your body wanting to step back while some other part of you wondered what it would feel like to let go. Not because you wanted to die, but because in that moment death became suddenly, startlingly real, and somehow feeling it there so close and so possible made you feel more alive than you had in months. This is the forbidden game. The one we don't talk about at dinner parties, the one that makes people uncomfortable when you mention it, because we've all agreed collectively and silently that death is the thing we push away, the thing we pretend isn't waiting patiently at the end of every breath we take. But you've noticed something the others haven't quite allowed themselves to see. People who never think about death, who successfully banish it from their minds and fill every silence with noise and every stillness with motion, often seem like they're half asleep, going through the motions, living yes, but not really alive, in that electric, conscious, precious way that makes every ordinary moment shimmer with significance. Then there are the others who've looked directly at it, not in a morbid way, and not with depression or despair, but with something like curiosity, respect, even a strange kind of intimacy. They're the ones who seem to taste their coffee more fully, who look at their children with an almost unbearable tenderness, who can sit in silence without discomfort because they've made peace with the fact that one day there will be nothing but silence. What's happening here is something psychologists call mortality salience, the awareness of death's inevitability. But that clinical term doesn't capture the full texture of it, the way it changes the quality of light in a room, the way music sounds different when you truly understand that you won't be here to hear it forever. You're playing with something ancient when you do this, something that goes back to the first human who understood that they personally would cease to exist. That moment changed everything and created art, religion, philosophy, meaning itself. Because once you know you're going to die, every choice becomes weighted with significance and every moment becomes a statement about what matters. But here's what's strange. Most of psychology has treated our relationship with death as purely defensive, as if the only healthy response is to not think about it, to protect ourselves from the anxiety it creates, to build elaborate psychological shields that keep the awareness at bay. And yes, there's truth to that because the terror is real and the existential anxiety can be crushing. But what about the other response? The one where you don't run from it but turn toward it, not with resignation or despair, but with a kind of gentle, curious acceptance. What happens to a person who learns to hold death in their peripheral vision, not as an enemy but as a teacher, as a companion that makes everything more vivid, more precious, more unbearably beautiful? You felt this in those moments when something reminded you, a funeral, or an illness or a close call, and suddenly the mundane irritations of life seemed absurd. The argument you were having became trivial, the grudge you were holding pointless, the fear that kept you from saying what you meant or doing what you dreamed or living the way you knew you should suddenly transparent and see-through, and obviously less important than the fact that you're here now briefly, impossibly alive. This is what it means to play with mortality, not to court death or be reckless or self-destructive, but to develop a relationship with the one certainty in your uncertain life, to let it inform you, to let it wake you up from the half-sleep that most people call living. The question isn't whether you'll die because you will. The question is whether you'll let that fact destroy you, or whether you'll let it illuminate everything you have while you have it. Whether you'll spend your life running from the truth, or whether you'll turn around and look it in the face and let it teach you how to be here fully, in this brief and precious moment that is your life. There's a reason you're drawn to this, a reason you felt that pull toward the edge, and that fascination with what lies beyond the veil. Not because there's something wrong with you. Some part of you understands that real life, vivid and conscious and meaningful life, requires acknowledging that it will end, that you can't truly love something without knowing you'll lose it. That beauty itself is impossible without impermanence. You're not playing with death because you're tired of living. You're playing with death because you want to learn how to live, really live, before it's too late. In the 1970s, A cultural anthropologist named Ernest Becker wrote something that changed how we understand human behaviour. He said that everything we do, our careers and our relationships and our beliefs and our identities, is a reaction to one unbearable fact, which is that we know we're going to die and we can't accept it. Think about that for a moment, not intellectually, but really feel into it. You are going to die. Your body, this thing you've inhabited your entire life that feels so permanent and so much like you, will stop working. Your consciousness, whatever it is and wherever it comes from, will cease or transform or vanish. We don't know. And that not knowing sits in the background of every moment of your life, whether you acknowledge it or not. Becker called this our denial of death. And he didn't mean it as an insult, but as a description of the human condition. We're the only animals that know we're going to power to die. And that knowledge would paralyse us if we faced it constantly. So we do something remarkable by building elaborate psychological structures that let us feel immortal, even though we know somewhere deep down that we're not. You see this in yourself, in the way you pursue success as if achievement could somehow make you permanent, in the way you want to be remembered, and to leave something behind and to matter in a way that transcends your brief time here. In the way you align yourself with groups and causes and nations and religions, things larger than yourself that will continue after you're gone. And by belonging to them, you participate in something eternal. This is what psychologists call terror management, the unconscious strategies we use to deal with the anxiety of knowing we're mortal. And here's what's fascinating. When researchers remind people of death subtly through questions about their own mortality, their behaviour changes in predictable ways. They cling more tightly to their worldviews. They judge people different from them more harshly. They seek status and wealth and legacy. They defend their beliefs more aggressively. They reach for anything that makes them feel significant and permanent and protected from the void. But you've noticed something about these defences, how exhausting they are, and how much energy it takes to maintain them. How you can spend your entire life building monuments to your own significance, accumulating achievements and constructing an identity and proving your worth, and still feeling quiet moments, that gnawing sense of impermanence, that everything you're building is sandcastles on a beach where the tide is always coming in. There's another way though, and it doesn't involve better defences or more elaborate monuments. Something more difficult and more subtle and more transformative. Stopping the defence altogether. Lowering your shield, looking directly at what you've been protecting yourself from. When you do this, when you allow yourself to really contemplate your mortality, not as an abstract concept, but as a concrete reality, something unexpected happens. At first, yes, there's fear, and sometimes overwhelming fear. The ground beneath you seems to disappear. Everything you've based your life on suddenly seems arbitrary and constructed and meaningless. But if you stay with it, if you don't immediately reach for comfort or distraction, something shifts. The fear doesn't go away, but it changes quality and becomes less like terror and more like tenderness. Like the ache you feel watching something beautiful that you know won't last. Like the way sunset is more precious because it's fleeting. People who've had near-death experiences often describe this transformation when they come back different, not traumatized though some are, but changed in their priorities and their values and what matters to them. The trivial concerns that dominated their lives before suddenly seem absurd. The relationships they took for granted become luminous with importance. The present moment, which they'd always rushed through on their way to some imagined future, becomes the only thing that's real. This isn't just anecdotal, because research shows that people who regularly contemplate their mortality through meditation, or through philosophy, or through deliberate practice, often report higher life satisfaction, stronger relationships, more authentic living. Not despite facing death, but because of it. Because when you stop running from the truth of impermanence, you stop postponing your real life. You stop waiting for the right moment, or the right circumstances, or the right version of yourself. You recognise that this moment, this breath, this conversation, this is it, and this is your life happening now, and it won't come again. The shield we build against death isn't protecting us from death, because death doesn't need protection from us. It's patient and inevitable, and already won. The shield is protecting us from life, from the intensity of really being here, from the vulnerability of loving things that will end, from the responsibility of making conscious choices about how we spend our brief, unrepeatable time. You felt this, the weight of the armor you carry, and the exhaustion of maintaining the illusion of permanence, and the loneliness of pretending you have forever, when every cell in your body knows you don't. What if you could put it down, not all at once because that would be too much and too destabilizing, but gradually and gently? What if you could learn to live with the knowledge of death, not as a threat to be defended against, but as a clarifying force that burns away everything that isn't needed? This is what it means to move beyond terror management. Not to have no terror because the fear is natural and human, and perhaps necessary, but to stop managing it through denial, and instead use it as a compass. To let it point you toward what truly matters, toward what you'd regret leaving undone, toward the life you'd live if you truly understood that you won't be here forever. The shield made you feel safe, but it also made you numb. And now you're starting to wonder what it would feel like to live without it, to feel everything, including the fear, yes, but also the beauty and the love, and the staggering improbability of being alive at all. Here now, briefly, impossibly, you. There are so many ways to touch death without dying, and you've probably discovered some of them without realizing what you were doing or without naming it for what it was, which is a kind of rehearsal, a reaching across the boundary to understand what stands on the other side. Some people do it with their bodies by climbing mountains where the air thins and every step becomes a negotiation with survival. They jump from planes and surf waves that could crush them and drive motorcycles too fast on winding roads. And if you've never felt that pull, it's easy to dismiss them as reckless, as adrenaline junkies chasing a high. But talk to them in quiet moments, the ones who do it consciously rather than compulsively, and they'll tell you something different. They'll tell you about the clarity that comes when death is close, how every sense sharpens, and how the noise in their head goes silent, and how they've never felt more present or more alive, or more real than when they're balancing on that edge. This isn't suicidal, but the opposite. People so hungry for life and so desperate to feel it fully that they have to bring death close enough to taste. Because somehow impossibly, the proximity of death is what makes life become vivid and undeniable. But you don't have to jump out of planes to play this game. Some people do it more quietly and more internally by sitting in meditation and visualizing their own death moment by moment. They practice what Buddhists call maranasati, death awareness meditation, where you contemplate your body decaying and returning to earth and dissolving into the elements it came from. Not to be morbid, but to become intimate with the truth of impermanence, to stop flinching from it. You might do it through art by writing stories where characters die, painting skulls, making music that sounds like grief. Through this, you're touching death at a safe distance, processing it and integrating it and trying to understand what it means. Every artist who's created something beautiful about mortality is engaged in this same game of trying to hold something that can't be held, to comprehend something that can't be fully known while you're still on this side of it. Or maybe you do it intellectually, by reading philosophy about death, studying different cultural approaches to dying, thinking deeply about what consciousness is and what happens when it ends. This too is a form of play, using your mind to explore territory your body hasn't reached yet, trying to prepare for the unprepared, and trying to make sense of the senseless. There's something that happens when you engage with mortality consciously and deliberately, as a practice rather than an accident. Death stops being purely terrifying and becomes textured and complex and even strangely beautiful in moments. You start to see death not as the opposite of life, but as its definition, its boundary, the thing that gives life its shape and urgency and meaning. You've probably noticed this in people who've survived serious illness or accidents, how they talk about life differently afterward, and how there's a depth to them that wasn't there before. They've been to the edge and come back, and they carry that knowledge in their bodies. They can't pretend anymore, can't sleepwalk through their days. They've seen how thin the membrane is between being and not being, and it changed them. But here's where it gets complicated, where the shadow creeps in. Because not everyone who plays with mortality is transformed by it. Sometimes the game becomes destructive. Sometimes the fascination curdles into something else. Into depression masquerading as philosophy. Into self-harm disguised as spiritual practice. into a slow suicide dressed up as fearlessness. You can feel the difference between the person who rock climbs because it makes them feel vibrantly and electrically alive, and the person who rock climbs because they don't particularly care if they fall, between contemplating death as a way to appreciate life more fully and dwelling in death fantasies as an escape from life's difficulty, between healthy integration of mortality and pathological absorption in it. The difference is subtle, but needed. When you're engaging with death in a psychologically healthy way, it opens you to life and makes colours brighter, relationships more precious, moments more meaningful, creates urgency but not desperation, reverence but not depression. You think about death, and it makes you want to call someone you love, to say the thing you've been afraid to say, to finally start that project you've been postponing, to stop wasting time on things that don't matter and invest yourself in things that do. But when the fascination becomes unhealthy, death starts to look like an answer rather than a teacher, like a relief, like somewhere better than here. The contemplation doesn't open you to life, but closes you off from it. You think about death, and it makes you want to withdraw and to isolate and to stop trying. The world starts to seem flat and meaningless and not worth engaging with. You're not playing with mortality anymore, but using it as an excuse to stop playing altogether. If you recognize yourself in that second description, please hear this. That's not wisdom or enlightenment, or bravery, or spiritual advancement. That's suffering that needs attention and care, and probably professional support. The healthy engagement with mortality always leads you back to life and not away from it. Because here's the thing, you can only truly befriend death if you genuinely love life. The contemplation of mortality is only transformative if it makes you more alive rather than less, if it makes you more present rather than more absent, if it makes you more connected rather than more isolated. The people who've mastered this, the ones who've integrated death into their consciousness in a healthy way, they're not the ones obsessed with dying, but the ones most fully engaged with living. They're not morbid but liberated. They've found a way to hold the knowledge of impermanence without being crushed by it, to let it inform their choices without paralyzing them, to use it as a lens that brings everything into sharper focus, rather than a weight that makes everything heavy. You're trying to find that balance, and that's why you're here reading this and thinking about these things. You sense that there's something valuable in facing mortality consciously, but you're also aware of the dangers. You want the clarity without the despair, the wisdom without the darkness, the transformation without the destruction. That balance is possible. It's delicate but possible. And it requires something simple but not easy, which is honesty. Honesty about why you're drawn to think about death, what you're hoping to find there, what you're running from or running toward. Because playing with mortality isn't really about death at all, but about learning to live without the comfortable lies we usually tell ourselves, without the fantasy that we have forever, without the illusion that tomorrow is guaranteed, about being here fully in the only moment we ever actually have. There's an old saying in some spiritual traditions which is die before you die. Not literally, of course, but metaphorically and psychologically and spiritually, to undergo death's transformation while you're still alive, to let everything you think you are dissolve and discover what remains. You've touched this in moments when some identity you were clinging to fell away, and instead of being destroyed, you felt strangely lighter and freer and more yourself somehow, with less to defend and protect. The job you lost that you thought defined you. The relationship that ended that you thought completed you. The version of yourself you outgrew that you thought was permanent. These small deaths are rehearsals teaching you something needed, which is that you are not the accumulation of roles and achievements and identities you've built. You're something more fundamental than that. Something that persists through change and through loss, and through the constant dissolution of everything you thought was solid. When you practice contemplating your actual death, not morbidly but consciously as a meditation, you're accelerating this process. You're asking yourself, if I died today, what would I regret? What would suddenly seem trivial? What would I wish I'd said or done, or risked or tried? And then, and this is the part that matters, you're letting those answers change how you live now, today, while you still can. Research has shown something counterintuitive. People who regularly contemplate their mortality report greater life satisfaction and more fulfilling relationships and clearer values and more authentic living. Not less joy, but more. Not more depression, but less. Because when you truly integrate the knowledge that your time is limited, you stop postponing your real life. You stop waiting for permission, or for the perfect moment, or for the right circumstances. You recognize that this is it. This ordinary Tuesday afternoon is part of your life and not a preamble to it. You start to notice what actually matters. The conversation with your friend where you both let your guards down becomes precious in a way it wouldn't if you had infinite conversations ahead. The quiet morning with coffee and sunlight streaming through the window becomes enough and becomes everything, because you understand that one morning you'll have your last coffee and see your last sunrise, and you won't know in advance which one it is. This awareness doesn't make you sad exactly, or rather it does, but it's a sweet sadness, a tender sadness, the kind that coexists with joy rather than cancelling it out. The feeling you get watching a child grow and knowing they'll never be this age again. The feeling of autumn, beautiful precisely because it's passing. The feeling of being human and conscious and aware of time moving in one direction only. Some people achieve this awareness suddenly through illness or accident or loss. They're forced to confront mortality, and if they survive it, they emerge changed. But you don't have to wait for tragedy. You can cultivate this awareness deliberately and gently as a daily practice. It might be as simple as lying in bed each morning and thinking, I woke up, I get another day, how do I want to use it? What matters today? If this were my last day, would I spend it angry at that person, worried about that thing, postponing that conversation? Or it might be visualizing yourself at the end of your life looking back. What would the person you're becoming want to see when they look back on today? Would they be proud of how you spent your time and your energy and your love? Or would they ache with regret for all the moments you sleepwalked through, all the connections you didn't make, all the beauty you didn't notice because you were too busy or too distracted or too convinced you had more time? This isn't about living perfectly or about pressure or productivity or optimizing every moment. Actually, the opposite. Stopping the relentless striving that comes from trying to make yourself permanent through achievement. Relaxing into your impermanence and discovering that when you're not trying to be immortal, you can actually be present. Be soft, be real, be flawed and temporary, and exactly, imperfectly yourself. Because here's what you discover when you really let yourself contemplate death. Nothing you achieve will save you from it. No amount of success or perfect relationship or beautiful body or accumulation of experiences or possessions or Instagram moments will add a single second to your finite time. All of that, all the striving and performing and proving. Just another defense against the truth you already know. But when you stop defending and start accepting, something opens up. Space for what's real. Space for connection without agenda. Space for beauty that you're not trying to capture or own. Space for love that you're not trying to make permanent. Space for grief and for joy and for everything that comes with being alive and aware and temporary. You become more tender with people because you know, really know, that one day you'll have a last conversation with each person you love and you won't know which conversation it is. You become more forgiving because the grudges and resentments that seem so important suddenly seem absurd when you remember that you're both going to die. That you're both just briefly conscious beings trying to navigate this strange existence. You become more grateful, not in a performative social media way, but in a bone-deep way. Grateful for your body while it still works, for your mind while it's still clear, for the people who see you, for the ordinary moments that make up a life, the meals and the conversations and the quiet evenings, and the small kindnesses that usually go unnoticed because we think we'll have infinite opportunities for them. This is what it means to die daily, to shed each day the illusion that you have forever. To remember each morning that you are temporary, to let that knowledge season everything you do with presence and with intention and with love. And the thing is, when you truly accept that you're going to die, you finally start to live. Not someday. Not when circumstances are perfect. Not when you've achieved enough or become enough or accumulated enough. Now. Today. In this breath and this moment and this brief, unrepeatable instant that is your life happening. You don't need to wait for permission to live fully. Death will give it to you eventually, at the very end when you suddenly see with devastating clarity what mattered and what didn't. But you don't have to wait. You can look at death now and learn from it now and let it teach you now how precious and fleeting and impossibly beautiful this all is. You're not playing with mortality because something is wrong with you. You're playing with mortality because you understand at some level that it's the only way to wake up, to stop sleepwalking, to live your actual life instead of the postponed and defended and half-alive version most people settle for. So go ahead and let yourself feel it. The impermanence, the uncertainty. The fact that all of this is temporary. It will hurt, but it will also crack you open to a kind of aliveness you've been searching for your whole life. Because you can't truly live until you've learned to die, and you can't truly die until you've learned to live.